A mountain, not a fucking house, not a damn villa, not even a private island that these billionaires do weird shit at. A mountain. At 19 years old, Kimi Antonelli owns a literal mountain in the Italian countryside. And that might not even be the most absurd thing on his balance sheet. Here is a teenager who had never started a single Formula One race, and Mercedes handed him a work seat anyway. A kid who grew up karting on weekends in northern Italy and is now worth more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes. A driver who cannot legally drink in half the countries he races in and already owns a fleet of cars that would make a seasoned billionaire feel genuinely insecure about his life choices. From a mountain retreat in the Apennines, to a supercar collection that reads like a manufacturer's wish list, to a jewelry haul that costs more than most people's homes, this is the financial empire of the most exciting young driver on the planet. And the remarkable thing is not just that he has it. The remarkable thing is how fast it happened. Because 12 months ago, the world outside of motorsport insiders had barely heard of him. And now he is sitting on one of the most valuable young athlete portfolios in European sport. This is the story of Andrea Kimi Antonelli and how a boy from Bologna built an empire before he was old enough to remember being poor. Andrea Kimi Antonelli is not the kind of driver who snuck up on anyone. He is the kind of driver who made Formula One come to him. Born in Bologna on the 25th of August, 2006, Antonelli grew up in the kind of Italian motorsport family that produces racers the way the rest of the country produces chefs, relentlessly, with enormous passion, and usually starting far too young for anyone's comfort. His father, Marco, was a racing driver. His uncle was a racing driver. The garage at home was less a garage and more a workshop, a classroom, and a second living room all at once. Racing was not something the family did. It was something the family was. He was in a kart at the age of 5. Not 5.5, 5. By the time most children were figuring out long division, Antonelli was already competing at national level in karting. By the time most teenagers were sitting their first exams, he was the FIA karting world champion. And by the time he was 15, Mercedes, one of the most powerful and calculating organizations in the history of Formula One, had seen enough. They signed him. Not as a vague prospect, not as a one to watch in a few years. They signed him with a plan. A specific, deliberate, deeply serious plan to put him in a Formula One car before he was a legal adult in most of Europe. That kind of institutional confidence in a 15-year-old is either visionary or reckless, and the answer depends almost entirely on whether you turn out to be right. Mercedes were right. That plan was not without turbulence, though. In 2024, Antonelli was entered for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza during Free Practice 1, his first time behind the wheel of a Formula One car on a live race weekend, in front of his home crowd on the fastest circuit on the calendar. And on his very first flying lap, he put the car into the barriers at Parabola. That is the kind of debut that ends careers, quietly shelved, quietly replaced, politely forgotten, a paragraph in someone else's biography. Mercedes did not forget him. They promoted him anyway. Because the thing about Antonelli, and this is what makes him genuinely different from other young talents who have passed through the sport, is that the crash was not the story. The story was everything that came after it. The composure, the adjustment, the speed that reappeared almost immediately, as if the wall at Parabolica had been a minor inconvenience rather than a career-threatening moment on the world stage in front of 150,000 Italian fans. He replaced Lewis Hamilton at 19 at Mercedes. That sentence needs a moment to sit. Take the moment. But before we talk about how Antonelli performs on track, we need to talk about what happens off it. Because what this young man has built and what has been built around him in the space of just a few years is genuinely extraordinary. And it is not the kind of story where a young athlete suddenly gets rich and goes and buys some obvious things. This is something with more structure, more depth, and considerably more Italian countryside than you might expect. When Mercedes signed Antonelli as a junior driver, they were not just investing in a racing talent. They were investing in a brand, a family, an ecosystem. And they were right to do so, because the Antonelli family had spent years quietly constructing the kind of infrastructure around Kimi that most drivers spend their entire careers trying to build from scratch. Going into his debut Formula One season, Antonelli was already one of the most commercially valuable young drivers in the sport. Mercedes backing, an Italian fan base that had been building and compounding since his early karting days. A surname that meant something in Bologna, in the region where motors and passion and heritage are not separate things, but the same thing, expressed three different ways. The contrast that defined his story was this. He was a teenager with the face of a student in the infrastructure of a corporation. On one side, youth, inexperience, a driver who had never scored a single Formula One point. On the other, Mercedes horsepower, Italian passion, a management team that knew exactly what they were doing, and a commercial value that was already before his first race genuinely significant. That gap between appearance and reality is where Antonelli's empire lives. Let us talk about money. Specifically, let us talk about what it looks like when an Italian teenager with generational talent, the right team behind him, and a fan base that was primed and waiting suddenly starts earning at the level of a works Formula One driver. Antonelli's reported salary for his debut season at Mercedes sits at approximately 5 million euros. For context, that is the entry-level figure for a work seat at one of the sport's top three teams. It is also approximately 4,900,000 euros we'll see in a decade. And that is before a single sponsorship deal, a single appearance fee, a single licensing arrangement gets added to the pile. His total estimated net worth across salary, sponsorship income, family business interests, and personal investments is currently placed somewhere between 15 and 20 million euros. Figures at that level are always estimates. Nobody outside the Antonelli family accountant knows the real number. But every credible source that tracks young athlete wealth in European motorsport points in the same direction, upward, consistently and steeply upward. This is a wealthy young man, and he does not hide it. Let us start with the most absurd item on the list, because it deserves its own moment, and I want you to really hear this. In the hills of the Emilia-Romagna region, the same part of northern Italy that produced Ferrari, Lamborghini, Ducati, and an almost suspiciously high number of the world's greatest racing drivers, the Antonelli family owns a significant parcel of land in the Apennine Mountains. And when we say significant, we mean large enough, elevated enough, and sufficiently documented in local property records that describing it as anything other than a mountain feels dishonest. It is not a ski resort. It is not open to the public. It is private land, part of a wider family estate that includes forested areas, agricultural land, and a property that has been in the extended Antonelli network for long enough to qualify as heritage rather than recent acquisition. This is old money meeting new money on a hillside, and the hillside is enormous. To put that into perspective, most 19-year-olds are renting a flat with two strangers and arguing about whose turn it is to buy washing up liquid. Kimi Antonelli is inheriting a mountain, a literal one, in Italy, in the same region that built the greatest automotive brands in human history. You could not write this if you tried. Now, the garage. Antonelli's personal car collection is, even by Formula One driver standards, exceptional. And Formula One driver standards are already completely deranged. These are people who drive 250 km/h machines for a living and consider that the relaxing part of their week, the headline piece, is a Ferrari SF90 Stradale, which, depending on specification, carries a price tag of somewhere between 350,000 and 500,000 euros. It is a hybrid hypercar producing just over 1,000 horsepower. It is, by any reasonable definition, completely unnecessary for a road vehicle. Antonelli owns one. He also drives it, which is either reassuring or terrifying depending on how you feel about 1,000 horsepower machinery on public roads in northern Italy, driven by a teenager. Alongside it sits a Lamborghini Urus Performante, the high-performance version of Lamborghini's super SUV, coming in at approximately 240,000 euros. The Urus is what the Italian automotive industry considers a sensible, practical family vehicle. It is not sensible. It is not practical. It is a 466 horsepower SUV built on a platform shared with the Porsche Cayenne and dressed in bodywork that looks like it is actively furious about something. The Performante version takes that and makes it worse, in the best possible way. Antonelli also keeps a Mercedes-AMG GT63S, which, given his employer, feels like the least surprising item on the list, but is still a 160,000 euro four-door performance car that covers 0 to 100 km/h. in 3.2 seconds. Consider this the understated, sensible daily driver option. That sentence is only funny because it is true. There are also several older Italian classics in the family collection. Vehicles tied more to heritage and history than to raw horsepower figures, and a significant assortment of performance road bikes, because apparently the Antonelli appetite for going very fast in various formats is not limited to 4 wheels, or even 2 seats. Total estimated value of the primary car collection, somewhere north of 1 million euros. He is 19. Beyond the mountain, and yes, we are still slightly fixated on the mountain, because it is a mountain. Antonelli maintains a primary residence in Bologna that is best described as architectural ambition, rather than simply a house. This is not a starter home. This is a statement. Bologna is not the cheapest city in Italy. It is a university town, a food capital, a cultural centerpiece of Emilia-Romagna, and property in the historic center carries price tags that reflect all of that history and all of that prestige. The Antonelli family home is a significant property in the kind of area where the address alone tells you everything you need to know about the people who live there. During the European racing season, Antonelli also has access to Monaco, the traditional tax-efficient home for Formula One drivers who suddenly find themselves with the kind of income that makes their accountants very interested in residential decisions. Whether Monaco becomes a permanent base as his career progresses is a question the next few seasons will answer, but the infrastructure for that transition is already very much in place. This is where it gets genuinely interesting. Antonelli has developed at a remarkably young age a very specific taste in personal accessories. Not ostentatious in the way some athletes go ostentatious. Not gold chains falling to the waist. Not a different watch in every interview. His approach is more considered, more deliberate, more Italian, which somehow counterintuitively makes it considerably more expensive. The centerpiece of his jewelry collection is a Richard Mille RM27, a watch that, depending on configuration, sits somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million euros. The Richard Mille RM series is what happens when watchmakers decide that the concept of value for money is an interesting but ultimately irrelevant constraint. These are watches made primarily of materials you would not normally associate with wristwear: carbon nanotube composites, titanium, ceramic, and they are engineered to withstand the forces experienced inside a Formula One cockpit, which for a Formula One driver is at least a practical justification. For everyone else on Earth who buys one, there is no justification available, and they do not need one because they spent €1 million on a watch, and the concept of justification left the room approximately 11 months ago. Alongside the Richard Mille, Antonelli has been seen wearing Rolex pieces, the Daytona and the GMT Master II in particular, adding another 150 to 200,000 euros to the wrist total. He also wears custom Italian-made jewelry, rings and bracelets produced by craftsmen in Bologna and the surrounding region, which is the kind of thing that sounds modest and artisanal right up until you learn what bespoke Italian jewelry actually costs, when the person ordering it is a Formula One driver with unlimited options. Total estimated jewelry value somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million euros, sitting on his wrist and in his display cases. When Antonelli is not driving 250 km/h racing cars or adding to a property portfolio that includes, again, a mountain, he lives the kind of life that is very specifically Italian in its pleasures, and I mean that sincerely. Food. He is from Bologna. Ragu was invented here. Mortadella was invented here. Tortellini was invented here. He eats well, he eats locally. He has spoken about food in interviews with the slightly defensive sincerity of someone who is aware that discussing pasta as a defining passion might undercut his image as an elite international athlete, but who simply cannot bring himself to pretend that he does not care about it with his entire being. Fashion. Antonelli wears Italian, almost exclusively. The houses you would expect: Gucci, Prada, Bottega Veneta, alongside emerging Italian designers who are not yet household names outside the industry but very much will be in the next 3 years. His style is not the loud, logo-heavy streetwear aesthetic that dominates the wardrobes of younger Formula One drivers trying to build an image. It is quieter, more tailored, more considered, and considerably more expensive per individual item as a direct result. Travel. During his limited downtime and a Formula One calendar leaves almost none, Antonelli returns to Emilia-Romagna, to the mountain. to the family, to the food. He is, for all the wealth and the machinery and the international profile building around him, still very much a Bologna boy. And he carries that identity without embarrassment and without performance. Here is the thing about Kimi Antonelli's empire that makes it genuinely different from the standard Formula One wealth story. Most drivers build their financial world gradually. First contract, first renewal, first sponsorship that actually pays well, first house, first car that costs more than it probably should have. It accumulates slowly over years, sometimes over an entire career. The money builds as the reputation builds. Antonelli arrived with the infrastructure already in place, the family foundation, the Italian connections, the regional loyalty, the management structure. And then Mercedes placed a works Formula One seat on top of all of it before he had taken a single championship point. In the end, he walked into his debut season not as a young man discovering what wealth looks like, but as a young man who had spent his entire life surrounded by people who already understood it completely. The wealth was not new to him. It had just scaled. The net worth figures, 15 to 20 million euros and climbing, are significant but almost secondary to the structure underneath them. The mountain, the property, the relationships, the brand. These are not things you build in a single contract cycle. These are things you build over generations and then hand to someone who drives very fast and makes it look like it all just happened naturally. And yet, the complication, because there is always a complication in any honest telling of this story, none of it matters if the results do not come. The Ferrari in the garage and the Richard Mille on the wrist mean precisely nothing if the Mercedes stops performing, if the development trajectory goes wrong, if the political pressure of replacing the greatest driver of his generation becomes too much weight for a teenager who still has not legally bought a drink in most of the countries on the Formula One calendar. The empire is real, but so is the pressure. Antonelli's legacy will not be written in property records or watch valuations or net worth estimates. It will be written in race results, in championships won or narrowly lost, in whether the boy from Bologna becomes one of the truly great drivers of his generation or becomes a genuinely fascinating footnote, the extraordinarily wealthy teenager who had everything except the right results at the right time. Right now, the early signs point firmly toward the former. But this is Formula One. It rarely goes the way the signs suggest. A mountain. That is where we started. That is where the Antonelli story keeps returning. To the hills of Emilia-Romagna, to the region that shaped him, to the family that invested in him long before any team principal or commercial partner had heard his name. Kimi Antonelli is 19 years old. He drives for Mercedes. He owns a supercar collection worth more than €1 million, a watch that costs more than most people's houses, and a piece of the Italian countryside that takes your breath away before you even know who it belongs to. And he is just getting started. If you want to see more on the next generation of Formula One's wealthiest young stars, go check out the video on Carlos Sainz's Spanish empire, because the numbers there will make you feel exactly the same kind of productive, motivated despair.